Hey there, crime enthusiasts. Welcome back to Plunge Into Crime. Today, we're diving deep into the disturbing case of one of the most notorious serial killers in American history, John Wayne Gacy. A name that, for many, has become synonymous with horror, deceit, and an unspeakable level of evil. But Gacy's story isn't just about the crimes he committed. It's about the chilling way he hid them in plain sight, the facade of normalcy he presented to the world, and how his true nature remained hidden for years. So sit back, because tonight, we're plunging deep into the mind of a killer. One that lived just outside Chicago, and whose story is as gruesome as it is perplexing. Background of John Wayne Gacy. Let's start from the beginning. John Wayne Gacy was born on March 17, 1942, in Chicago, Illinois, to John Stanley Gacy and Marion Elaine Gacy. He was the second of 3 children, and while many may think of Gacy as simply the monster he became, his early life wasn't one of obvious signs of danger. At least, not on the surface. Gacy's father was an alcoholic and often abusive. He was said to have belittled and physically punished his children, especially John. Gacy's relationship with his father was so strained that it would influence his later actions in terrifying ways. On top of this, Gacy was overweight as a child, and often the target of bullying. He wasn't the popular kid in school and, by all accounts, was a bit of a loner. But there were flashes of charm, too. Moments where Gacy would show signs of fitting into society's standards. A school performance that impressed his classmates. But this was always undermined by his internal struggles. But here's where things start to get interesting. In his teenage years, Gacy began experiencing troubling fantasies. It's said that he had an interest in cross-dressing, which only further alienated him from the people around him. But these fantasies weren't the ones of a typical teenager. They were the beginning of a much darker journey. Gacy's early crimes and dark fantasies. Now, before he became the infamous killer, John Wayne Gacy did have a fairly normal adult life, at least on the surface. He worked a variety of jobs, from being a fast food chain manager to eventually getting involved in the local Chicago Democratic Party. He even ran a successful construction business, which, later, would become part of his method of luring victims. In the late 1960s, Gacy's behavior took an even darker turn. He was arrested for the first time in 1968 for sexually assaulting 2 teenage boys. Gacy lured them into his car under the pretense of offering them a ride. But once they were inside, he attacked them. After being caught, he claimed it was a misunderstanding. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison but was released after only serving 18 months. It's here, though, that the first cracks in Gacy's facade begin to show. Let's take a closer look at why Gacy's release from prison set the stage for his future crimes. He was sent to a psychiatric hospital after his initial conviction, where he was diagnosed with a mental disorder. But, ironically, the very thing that might have helped others was one of the reasons Gacy was able to manipulate his way out. In prison, he was described as being cooperative and charming. His behavior didn't fit the image of the dangerous, violent criminal he would later become, so he convinced the authorities he had reformed. The murders begin, but make no mistake, John Wayne Gacy's darkest impulses had only just begun. After being released, Gacy's life seemed normal to the outside world. He got married, moved to Norwood Park, a suburban neighborhood in Chicago, and started a family. But this is where his double life began to truly take shape. John Wayne Gacy was known for hosting extravagant parties, complete with a clown costume that he'd wear for children's events. But beneath this public persona, he began to lure young men and boys into his home, offering them work, money, and sometimes alcohol. Once they were inside, Gacy would overpower them, often torturing and sexually assaulting them. He would then strangle them with a rope or a piece of cloth, often in a ritualistic manner. The first victim was a 15-year-old boy named Timothy Jack McCoy. Timothy Jack McCoy vanished on New Year's Eve in 1976. He was found dead in Gacy's home, though Gacy later claimed it was an accident. Over the next few years, the killings escalated, and more young boys disappeared under similar circumstances. Gacy's modus operandi was chillingly methodical. He would often perform these acts of violence in his home, taking advantage of the secluded, quiet space he had built for himself and his family. The bodies of his victims were stored in his crawl space, where they would later decompose. Others were dumped in nearby rivers. It wasn't just the brutality of the murders that made Gacy's crimes so horrific. It was his ability to live a double life and escape suspicion for so long. The investigation begins as the body count grew, so did the number of missing persons in the Chicago area. But John Wayne Gacy wasn't on anyone's radar yet. It wasn't until 1978, when a 15-year-old named Robert Piest went missing, that the investigation into Gacy began in earnest. Piest was last seen leaving work at a pharmacy, telling his mother he had a meeting with a contractor about a potential job. This contractor, of course, was Gacy. Piest's disappearance caught the attention of the public, especially when they learned that Gacy had been involved in offering work to young men. But even then, the investigation wasn't as straightforward as you might think. Gacy was well liked in his community, and had even earned the nickname, the Killer Clown. He was known to many as a hard-working, upstanding citizen. Some even described him as generous. This made it harder for the authorities to immediately suspect him. However, as the investigation progressed, Gacy's behavior began to raise red flags. Police, under the pressure of Piest's disappearance, started to investigate Gacy more closely. They found numerous items in Gacy's house that led them to suspect Gacy was responsible for the murders, including items of clothing belonging to the missing boys. Gacy's arrest and the discovery of the bodies By December of 1978, the police had enough evidence to obtain a search warrant for Gacy's home. What they found when they entered the house was beyond the comprehension of those involved. Inside his home, in the crawl space beneath the floorboards, they discovered the remains of at least 29 young men. Some were partially decomposed, while others had been preserved in Gacy's sickening, twisted arrangement. But it wasn't just the bodies that shocked the investigators. It was the methodical nature of the killings. The way Gacy had orchestrated every aspect of his crimes, from the lure of a job to the final moments of life for each of his victims. The horror was almost too much to comprehend. Trial and conviction. After his arrest, John Wayne Gacy faced trial for the murders of 33 young men and boys. His defense tried to argue that Gacy was not fully responsible for his actions, claiming he was insane at the time of the killings. But the prosecution painted a picture of a cold, calculating killer who had carefully planned and executed his murders over several years. The trial was a media sensation, with reporters from all over the country descending on Chicago to cover the case. Gacy, however, seemed unmoved by the gravity of the situation. He appeared smug and unfazed during the trial, which only added to the public's horror. In 1980, Gacy was convicted of 33 murders and sentenced to death. Aftermath and execution. Gacy's case was one of the most highly publicized serial killer cases in history, and it left a permanent scar on the American public. The impact of his crimes was far-reaching, and his name became synonymous with evil. Gacy spent 14 years on death row, appealing his sentence repeatedly, but all his efforts were in vain. On May 10, 1994, John Wayne Gacy was executed by lethal injection at the Stateville Correctional Center in Illinois. His death ended the reign of terror that had lasted for years, but for the families of his victims, the scars would never heal. Reflection and conclusion. And so, what can we learn from the horrifying story of John Wayne Gacy? It's a chilling reminder that evil can hide behind the most unsuspecting faces. Gacy's charm, his community involvement, and his position in society allowed him to avoid suspicion for far longer than he should have. And it's a tragic truth that, in the end, the most dangerous killers are often the ones you least expect. And with that, we come to the end of today's dive into the disturbing world of John Wayne Gacy. A man who lived a double life, hiding his true nature beneath a mask of charm and normalcy. His story is one that still shocks to this day, and it serves as a grim reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface. If you found this story as chilling and compelling as we did, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notifications so you never miss an episode. We've got plenty more real-life crime stories coming your way, each one more twisted and captivating than the last. And hey, if you liked this deep dive, leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you think, and if there's a particular case you'd like us to cover next. Thanks for watching, and remember, crime is never as far away as we think. Stay safe, and keep plunging into crime with us. Until next time, take care.